and welcome to this Design Cuts video tutorial. Today we'll be making a mixtape CD cover and it's going to have a road trip theme. Now I'll be using a number of Design Cuts assets in this project, so let's have a look and see what I'll be using. Firstly, I'll be using 3 images from this 100 high-res photos collection by Moonloop. I chose these images because there are a lot of images here that you could use for that sort of road trip theme, and they also sort of lend themselves to a mixtape cover because they've got this sort of washed out look to them. Ideal images to use for this project. So I'm going to be using a tree, an image of some hay bales over here, and there's also a light image that I'm going to use to sort of use as a texture. I'll be using a second texture, and this will be coming from the Ultimate Texture and Photography Kit shown here. The fonts I'll be using Newcastle, just an element out of this font, a sort of glyph. I'll be using Instaquote lettering. I'll be using one of these fonts, and I'll also be using a CD Mockup image from the Header Stationery Scene Generator. So you can see there's lots of our assets being used in this project. Now the project is also going to showcase some Photoshop techniques. You'll learn how to reflect an image, you'll learn some blending techniques. We'll be working with a shape, we'll be looking at layering and texturing, we'll be looking at working with text and glyphs, also with smart objects and creating mock-ups. So there are a lot of techniques that you'll learn in this video so that even if the aesthetic of the CD mix cover doesn't suit you, certainly the techniques that we'll be using will be of value to you in your work in Photoshop in the future. To get started, I already have Photoshop open, so I'm going to create a new file. Now, I happen to know that the CD mockup I'll be using is about 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels. So I'm going to make my document just a little bit larger, but not overly large because it just doesn't need to be overly large. I'm using RGB color mode, and let's set it to a white background and just click create. I'm just going to be creating the front part of the CD cover, so I'm working with a square image. Let's go and get the images that we'll be using, and we'll do this one at a time. I'm going to start with the tree image, so let me just go and get that. I've had it open recently. So this is the tree image I'll be using. I'm going to open up the layers palette, which of course you can get to by choosing window and then layers. I'm going to take this layer, this background layer, into my document. I'm going to do the same thing for all of the images. So I'm not going to repeat these instructions over again once we've done it the first time. So I'm just going to drag this over, hold the shift key so that's centered in this image, and let go. Now this image is way bigger than the image that we're working, and you can see that we can't even see the tree. So I'm going to press Control T and then Control 0. On a Mac that would be Command T to get your transform handles up. Command 0 to be actually able to see them because they're so far away from the image. I'll hold the Shift key and the Alt key on a PC. That would be Shift Option on a Mac as I drag this image down so that it is pretty much the size of my artboard. I'm making it just a little bit bigger so I don't have to be so accurate in my sizing. I'll click the check mark. Making sure that my tree is well inside the image and well over the halfway mark, which it is. It's well past this sort of center mark, so it's going to be able to be reflected really nicely. If that were not the case, then I would just move the tree over a little bit, but it was in a perfect position, so I'm going to leave it where it is. I'm going to make a duplicate of this layer, so I'll take the layer and just drag it onto the new layer icon here, so I have a second tree. Without moving the tree, I'll go straight to Edit and then Transform and then Flip Horizontal. That just flips the tree horizontally. So you can see here in the Layers palette, I've got the tree on both sides of the image. The problem is I just can't see this tree in this area. So to do that, I'm going to take half of this image away. The easy way of doing that is to quickly add a guide. I'll choose View and then New Guide. Now I could put the exact vertical position in here, but since I know it's halfway across the document, I'm just going to set it to vertical and position 50% and click OK. And Photoshop's going to do all the math for me. Now I'll go to the Marquee Tool, the rectangular Marquee Tool, start dragging out here, and then just pick up that guide. Your marquee is going to snap to that. I've got this topmost layer selected, so I'll just press the Delete key to remove that portion of the image so that I can see the tree underneath. At this point, I don't need my guide any longer, so I'll choose View and then Clear Guides. I'll press Control or Command D to deselect my selection. And if I'm happy with what I'm seeing here, I can just merge this down. So I'll right click and choose Merge Down, and that just merges those two layers together so that this layer here contains the reflected tree image. So we're done with the tree now. Let's go and get the hay bales. So I'll go and open the hay bale image and then bring the layer, the background layer from that image into this one. This image is also much larger than the work area that we have. So holding Shift and Alt, Shift Option on the Mac, I'm going to resize the image. In this case, I'm not going to resize it all the way down. I'm going to show you in a minute exactly why. I'll click the check mark to confirm the transformation. I want to blend these two layers together, so I'm going to start working down the blend modes. So I'll select Dissolve and then press the down arrow key to move through the blend modes so I can check to see which one I want to use. If you're using a Mac, you won't be able to use the up and down arrows. You'll have to use Shift plus or Shift minus, and you'll also need to make sure that you don't have a brush tool selected. I suggest that you go ahead and just select the rectangular marquee tool when you're doing it on a Mac. It just makes life a whole lot easier. So I just moved down each of these blend modes to see which one I may want to use. If you're on a Mac, as soon as you get to the end, you'll scroll immediately around and start all over again. If you're on a PC, that's not the case. You'll have to go back up. Now I want to use the multiply blend mode, so let me just go and pick that up. This is the reason why I didn't want my hay bale image to be the exact same size as my CD, because you can see that the horizon on these two images is different. If I make this hay bale image a little bit overly large, then I can move it up so that the horizons pretty much match. I'm going to nudge it with the up arrow key once I get it pretty close. Now I'm not worried about the fact that the horizons are not 100% even. I just want this sort of look where they're pretty much in the same place. The next element we're going to add in are some lights. So let me just close this image and open up the lights. As expected, the lights image is much larger than the image we're working on, so holding Shift and Alt or Shift Option on a Mac, I'm going to size it down. I'm also going to move it up so it's pretty much at the top of this image. Now at the moment, obviously it doesn't look very good in the image, but again, we're going to select a blend mode. The blend mode that I'm going to use for this, because I've experimented with it, is lighten. But of course you can experiment with the blend mode yourself to see what works best for you. One of the benefits of using the lighten blend mode is that it's killing the black. The black is totally disappearing because it's not lighter than the content underneath. And so you're able to get rid of black by using the lighten blend mode and just use these really interesting light elements. Now the lights are a little bit more colorful than the image, which is concerning me a little bit. So I'm going to apply a hue saturation adjustment to this. I'll do it as an adjustment layer so it's editable. I'll choose Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and choose Hue Saturation. Click OK. I'm going to decrease the saturation so that the lights are being killed in the saturation. The problem, of course, is that it's affecting the entire image. I only want it to affect the lights. To do that, I'll click here on this icon, and that limits the change, limits this hue saturation adjustment layer to just the layer immediately below. So it's killing the lights but having no effect on the rest of the image, which is of course exactly what I want to be the case. I'm going back to this layer and just moving it up a little bit. I want to get the lights just over the edge a little bit. So we're now finished with the images from the high-res photo collection. Let's go and get a texture image. And this is one of the ones from that larger texture image collection. This is the texture image we'll be using, and you'll see immediately that the texture was rectangular, whereas our image is square. As I've been doing, I'm going to bring it down to size, holding Shift and Alt on a PC, Shift Option on a Mac. Once I get it nearly to size, I'm going to let go of the Shift key, just use Alt or Option to size in the sides. Generally with texture images, it's going to be fine to squash them up because they're textures. Nobody knows what they're supposed to look like, and so you'll be able to squash them up and still have something that works really nicely as a texture. Of course, we'll need to blend this in, and for this I'm going to use the hard light blend mode, but of course you can experiment with various blend modes to find the one that you like. I think this is a little bit too intense an effect. So I'll go to my texture layer and just reduce the opacity, probably down to about 80% or so is sufficient. I can also work on the texture a little bit by adding a layer mask. So with the texture selected, I'll click the Add Layer Mask icon. I'm going to my brushes and I'm going to select a very, very soft, it has 0 hardness, round brush. This is from the General Brushes collection. I'm going to enlarge it quite a little bit and I'm going to set its color to not quite black. So I want it sort of about 2/3 of the way down the gray scale here. I'll target my mask to make sure I'm painting on the mask, and I'm just going to start painting in here. Click, a little bit of painting, maybe just clicking, just to bring back into focus the center of the image. Now it's also possible to then work with just black over the trees. And you'll want to be spending more time than I am on this just to get a sort of blending of the texture as well as the image underneath. And you could also use a texture brush. So you could use a brush that's not circular like this, but you could use something like a dry media brush or a wet media brush, something that's got a sort of interesting effect to it. You could use those to blend that in. But I just wanted to see a bit more of the trees, and I did want to see a little bit more of the hay bales in the middle as well, because I kind of like those. Now we're ready to add a border and some text. For this, I'll add a new layer. I'm going to the rectangle tool here. So it shares a toolbar position with some other shape tools. I'm making sure that I have this set to shape. I have fill set to nothing. I'm going to sample a color from the image to use. So I'll use the eyedropper tool and just sample a color, a sort of light color that complements the image, and we're going to use that for our shape. So I'll make sure that that's selected, so it's this one here in the most recently used colors. To draw out our border, I'm going to start just inside the edge of the artboard, hold the Shift key down and draw. For some reason, Photoshop insists on drawing out from the middle of the shape, but we can fix that in a minute. Making sure here that my shape in the properties panel is going to be smaller than my artboard. I know my artboard's 2000 by 2000, so this is pretty good. Let's go to the layers palette. We have our shape here. When I click away from the shape tool, you'll see that we do have that border in place. I want to use this as an example to show you a way of centering a layer within an artboard, because it's not self-evident how to do that. To start off with the Move tool selected, I'm going to Control click on the shape layer. So this is the one that has the rectangle on it. You can see the marching ants here. Then I'll press Control or Command A, and I lose that selection, and instead I get a selection around the actual artboard. And I also get these tools up here which allow me to center my shape. So I'm going to choose the horizontal align center and vertical align center options, and you can see now that your shape has been centered. So that's how you can center the contents of a layer within the artboard. I'll press Control or Command D to deselect my selection. Now my border is a little bit too small, so with it selected with the Move tool, I'll hold Shift and Alt, that's Shift and Option on a Mac, and just size it to where I want it to be and click the check mark. I think it's too intense, so I'm going to blend it in with the lighten or the screen blend mode. I think I'll use lighten, and I can also dial down the opacity so it's not quite as intense. If you want to adjust the width of the border, go back to one of the shape tools, and that gives you access to the border width here. I'm going to make it 11 pixels, so it's a little bit narrower. I'll press Control or Command 0 so we can zoom into the image and just see how things are looking. Still think this is a bit thick, so let's go down to about 7 pixels. Let's add some type. For this, I'm going to start with a new layer. Click the type icon here. I'll be using the Instaquote Heartstrings font, so I'm going to select it. I know it needs to be about 70 points, so I'll select that. I'll click here in the document and just type the words Road Trip 2018. Okay, so I think I overestimated my type size quite considerably here. Let's just take it down to probably around 40. I'm going to add another layer, and for this I want to use a glyph from the other font that I showed you, the Newcastle font. To use glyphs successfully, it's a little bit funky, so let's have a look and see how we're going to do it. First of all, we're going to select the font. So I'm using Newcastle, and I want to use the Extras Rusty because that's the one that contains the element that I want to use. I'm going to set the size, and I want this to be about double the size of the road trip font. I just know that I'm going to need that. I've set the color here. I've got a brand new layer, which means that when I click, I'm creating a totally new text object here. That's what I need to do. So you need to be at this point before you start looking at your glyphs. Now, glyphs are really hard to find unless you use the Glyph panel because you have no idea what shape is associated with what letter of the alphabet. So in Photoshop, choose Window and then Glyphs. This gives you access to this Glyphs panel, which shows you the contents of the font. So it's very easy to select the one that you want to use. But you do want to have already clicked in the document so that when you double click on the element you want to use, it jumps in the document. I want to use this set of arrows. These arrows are a little bit longer than these up here. So just be aware of that if you're using this Newcastle font. This is the one I want to use. Double click on it and it's added to the document. So I can close the panel down now, go to the move tool and just move this down. Now it is way too big, so I want to shrink it down. So I'll just go to the text tool, select over the shape, and let's drop it down to, let's try about 60 points. That's looking a bit better. And just move it into position. At this point, my CD mix cover is complete. Of course, you'll want to put a little bit more work into yours, but the basic techniques that you'll be using are those that you've seen here. You'll save the file, so I'll choose File and then Save, and I'm going to save this as a layered PSD file. I'll call this Road Trip. Once it's been saved, we can then use it in the mockup, so I'll go ahead and open the CD Mockup. The CD Mockup file comes with a number of different layers, and so you'll just need to choose the layer you want to work with. What I want is the CD envelope front, so I'm going to turn off everything else and just hide everything else. And this is the element here that I want to use. If we have a look inside it, you'll see that there's a smart object with a mask. So I'll click here to open up the smart object. So this is the PSB file that is the smart object that is used inside the CD Mockup, but it's the smart object we want to work with at this point. I'm going to take this element and just trash it. And I want to bring in my CD cover. To do this, I'll choose File and then Place Embedded. And I'm going to choose our Road Trip PSD file, the one we just created, and click Place. Now again, it's too big, but we know exactly what to do with that. Control T, Control 0, that's Command T, Command 0 on the Mac. Hold the Shift and Alt keys on a PC, that's Shift Option on a Mac, and just size it to suit. Click the check mark. Now this is a smart object, and if you're not familiar with working with smart objects, this is what you're going to do at this point. This is layer 22 PSB and you're going to save it. So just choose File, Save. And then go back to your CD Mockup and you'll see that your smart object is already in the CD Mockup. Now if you need to make changes to this, let me just go and close this PSB file for a minute. To make changes to this, double click the smart object icon. It automatically reopens your PSB file. You can make changes to it. This is a smart object in itself, so you could double click on this to reopen your Photoshop file. It's not the Photoshop file that we created earlier. It's another instance of that Photoshop file. So you could make changes to that. You'll save those changes, then you'll go one step back up the smart object track, save this file, and then you'll go back to your CD Mockup and you'll see the changes in there. Smart objects are great to use because they are resizable, scalable, and they just make sense to use in situations like this. So there you have the process for creating a mixtape CD cover, and this is the kind of process that you could use in creating a collage, for example. These sorts of tools and techniques are easily applicable to creating any sort of collage project. I really hope that you've enjoyed learning these Photoshop techniques. Let us know what you think in the comments below and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this tutorial. Until next time, I'm Helen Bradley for Design Cuts.